Hi everybody, welcome back. Miss Calabrese here. So in this video we're going to be talking about the basics of cellular anatomy and kind of reviewing all of the organelles that are inside a typical cell. All right, so starting off, the inside of this cell contains cytoplasm. And cytoplasm has two components. One is the cytosol, which is the actual fluid part of this cytoplasm, and then the other component is the organelles. All right, so starting off with the endoplasmic reticulum. So endoplasmic reticulum is a network of membranes on the inside of the cell that has a couple different jobs depending on what type of endoplasmic reticulum it is. All right, so the rough endoplasmic reticulum, this is going to be connected directly to the nuclear envelope. There are going to be a whole bunch of ribosomes that are embedded in the membrane of the rough ER. So the job of the rough ER is going to be to produce proteins, right? The ribosomes are the ones actually producing those proteins, but the rough ER acts as sort of like a facility for that to happen, a place where the ribosomes can do their work. Right? So that's what rough ER does. Smooth ER is usually continuous with rough ER, so we find it in the same place, sort of attached to the rough ER, but it's smooth because it does not have any ribosomes, and it has a different job. So smooth ER has nothing to do with proteins. What it does is synthesizes and stores fats, and it has the capability to detoxify certain drugs in certain cells. Okay, so kind of zooming in on what a ribosome here looks like. So ribosomes are the tiny little organelles that function as protein makers. So these guys are responsible for protein synthesis. They are not membrane bound, so most of the organelles we're talking about here have their own kind of phospholipid bilayer. That's not true of ribosomes. So ribosomes are just composed of protein and ribosomal RNA. And the protein and ribosomal RNA is folded into such a shape that it facilitates protein synthesis here, right? And each ribosome is made of a large subunit and a small subunit put together. All right, Golgi apparatus. So this Golgi complex is a series of membranous sacs that are kind of stacked on top of one another. So instead of being like a connected network of tubes like the endoplasmic reticula are, these are kind of individual pancakes almost that are just stacked one on top of the other. So these individual pancakes have a few different names. Sometimes they're called cisternae. Sometimes they're called dictyosomes, and sometimes they're just referred to as Golgi bodies. So you might see any one of those different terminology, different words used to describe these individual Golgi bodies. But the function of the Golgi apparatus is to receive vesicles from the ER. So vesicles are, again, little kind of phospholipid bubbles. These guys bud off of the rough ER, and inside them are proteins, proteins that have been synthesized by ribosomes in the rough ER. Those proteins are carried over to Golgi, and the Golgi is going to be, his job is going to be to kind of modify and package those proteins and then send them out where they need to go. So he's kind of like the FedEx of your cell. So he's packaging, he's shipping the proteins where they need to go. Right. Lysosomes are small organelles that are basically little digestive bubbles on the inside of your cells. So they perform a process called autophagy, which means self-digestion, essentially self-eating. So this is when we have waste particles that are building up inside of the cell. The lysosomes are responsible for breaking those down. So they're just small organelles that are filled with digestive enzymes. All right, and then mitochondria. Mitochondria are, you've probably heard them referred to as the powerhouse of their cell. This is where ATP is generated. Most of the ATP in your cells are generated in the mitochondria. So mitochondria themselves are kind of independently functioning organelles. So they have their own DNA. They reproduce on their own time schedule. They look like little bacteria on the inside of your cells, which essentially they are. And their whole job is to efficiently break down glucose into ATP, so to break down food energy into ATP using oxygen. So this is where the oxygen comes into play. All right, another organelle here, peroxisomes. So peroxisomes are basically little detoxifying organelles. They help you detoxify reactive oxygen species like peroxides. So your body, some of your cells generate hydrogen peroxide as a byproduct of certain chemical reactions. Peroxisomes are responsible for breaking that down into something less toxic. All right, and then centrioles. So centrioles are not membrane bound like most of the rest of these organelles. Centrioles are composed of protein. They are basically a collection of microtubules that are arranged in this sort of circular fashion. And you have two of them, so there's usually a pair of centrioles in each cell. And this is where all the microtubules in your cell originate from. So they come from these centrioles. The centrioles are going to be important for, very important for cellular reproduction. So when the cell goes to divide and it needs to move its chromosomes from one side of the cell to the other, the centrioles are going to be responsible for carrying out that action. Okay, so the cytoskeleton, your cells have a cytoskeleton just like your body has a skeleton. The point of it is to create kind of a rigid framework to support the cell. So the cytoskeleton is made of three different components. Microtubules are the largest component of your cytoskeleton. These are made of a protein called tubulin. The microtubules originate from the centrioles, and they extend throughout the entire cell, and their job is to basically provide a scaffolding, so a rigid support network to hold the cell together. Microfilaments, sometimes called actin filaments, these are smaller proteins, so the protein here is actin. These are mostly found around, kind of associated with the cell membrane. So we find it kind of associated with the cell membrane to help the cell membrane change shape. So when the cell membrane needs to change shape either for the cell to move or for the cell to divide or for us to undergo some sort of bulk transport, that's where the actin filaments come in. And then the last component of your cytoskeleton here is intermediate filaments. These can be made of different things, but they're mostly made of keratin. And they sort of begin at the nuclear envelope and radiate outwards to the cell membrane. And as they kind of radiate out from the cell membrane, they anchor organelles in place so that those organelles aren't all bouncing around and running into each other. Okay. And then cilia and flagella. So these are appendages that we can find on the outside of cells. So these are not on all cells. In fact, they're not on most cells. But what they do is facilitate movement. And they both have the same structure. So looking at the structure of these, the cilia or flagella, what looks like a flagellum in this case, we have an arrangement of microtubules. So 9 pairs of microtubules kind of radiating around a central pair. So that's our 9+2 construction of flagella and cilia. So they're both structured the same way. Cilia tend to be shorter and more numerous. Flagella, usually there's only one and it's much longer. So in humans, the only place where we find flagella are on sperm cells. So that's the only place we find flagella. Cilia don't assist in moving a cell like flagella do. What they do is assist in moving fluids around the outside of a cell. Right, so we find cilia lining parts of your respiratory tract to help move mucus. We also find cilia in places in your brain to help circulate cerebrospinal fluid, and then also in the fallopian tubes to facilitate the movement of the ovum towards the uterus. Okay, so now getting to the nucleus. So the nucleus is the largest organelle. It's usually the easiest one to see under a microscope. It is surrounded by a nuclear envelope, which is a double phospholipid bilayer, so super strong membrane that's going to be really protective of the contents of the nucleus. So contents are going to be the nucleolus, which is a structure on the inside of the cell where RNA is made, where ribosomes are generated. Right, so that's the nucleolus. And then in there we also find chromosomes. And the chromosomes are basically packages of DNA that are made of chromatin. And all chromatin is a combination of DNA and protein. So DNA wraps around protein, and those packets of DNA and protein together are chromosomes. All right, so here's a way to kind of visualize that. So up here at the top, we can see the actual DNA double helix. That DNA is going to be wrapped around particular proteins. In the case of your cells, they're wrapped around histone proteins. So we see the DNA kind of wrapping around these histone proteins, and then histone proteins wrapping around each other. And that combination of DNA and histone protein we refer to as chromatin. And then when we get a whole bunch of it all kind of packaged up together, that's one single chromosome. All right, so inside most of your body cells or somatic cells, you're going to have 46 chromosomes. They come in 23 pairs. So 23 chromosomes you got from your mom, 23 chromosomes you got from your dad, and so they're kind of paired up together. This is not true for sex cells or the gametes. Sperm and egg only contain 23 chromosomes. All right, so a couple questions here to kind of check your knowledge. What's the primary component of a plasma membrane or cell membrane? All right, hopefully you guessed phospholipids, so that's the main component of the cell membrane. And then in addition to phospholipids, what else do we find in the cell membrane? So take a moment to think about that. What else is in there? All right, so a couple things. We've got proteins, right? We've got integral proteins and peripheral proteins. And then we also have cholesterol. And cholesterol is lending strength to the membrane. All right, and then last question here. What membrane-bound organelle within the cell is responsible for most of the ATP production? So which organelle is making our energy? All right, hopefully you said mitochondria. All right, so let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this was helpful.